Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the Vibe Daily Chat group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right, welcome back to the VIBEZ Daily podcast. It is day 110 of our year-long series we have titled Devoted, and we are so glad to have you back with us as we bring the book of 2 Kings to a conclusion. I am back again, joined by my wife, Victoria, and so excited to have her with me again as we have started at the beginning of Kings, made our way through the end of it together here. Sharing our thoughts and observations along the way. But left off with King Hezekiah, who was a good king by most standards, pretty much a good king. Made a foolish decision there at the end, but still had a good heart, had the Lord with him and had favor. And now are introduced to another king of Judah, King Manasseh, here in chapter 21. So, what do you think was interesting about King Manasseh? He is 12 when he becomes king. But what are some things you think interesting here in 21?
I think it was interesting that he ruled right off jump. This verse 1, 55 years. And that he was evil.
Yeah.
I'm like, Lord, why you let the evil one stay around for so long now? I know this is fulfilling the prophecy, right? Or like he was doing things, just letting them be.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not even trying to save y'all no more, because y'all not trying to be saved. And he told Hezekiah that things were going to go downhill after he died anyway. So, but that's a long time for evil to occur, and he did a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I think what is so interesting, you're right, is that idea that like his covenant with David is ultimately what's like keeping these kings on the throne despite this. Like I said, I love that about God. Like I love that even our sin can't get in the way of his plan, like in his promise. You know what I mean? Like, because that's what it says to me. It's very similar to we were going through Judges, and like Samson was wilded, but God raised up Samson to conquer the Philistines. That was his whole goal. Now, the fact that he didn't get to enjoy the fruits of that because he ultimately does most of his damage through his own death, it's his fault because he doesn't live by the standard God. But God was going to get done what he needed to get done, which was to conquer the Philistines, in that particular case. And so in a similar way, like there is a promise that is going to come to fruition generations later, but it needs to come through David. And God's like, I got to make sure of that. And so despite your mess, I'm still going to make sure of that. So I don't know, like you said, he's doing a lot. He's a pretty crazy king, and again, sandwiched between a couple good kings. Right? 'Cause we just had Hezekiah, and soon we'll have another good king in Josiah. If I'm Hezekiah, I'm also just like heartbroken. Like,
I'm just like, your dad was so. How did you end up so left? How did you end up so much over here? I mean, because when I said he goes in, like he said, like he's doing Baal stuff. He's fortune telling, omens, mediums. Like he's setting up stuff in the courtyard of the temple. Like, what in the world are you doing? Like,
yeah.
He's doing a lot. Asherah's up over here. he's like, tell me what I can get my hands on.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do it.
Yeah. I think he is the king that ultimately brings judgment upon Judah.
Yeah.
Just the ultimate judgment, right? Like Hezekiah was foolish, but I think, as you said, that was almost a picture. That's not what caused Judah to be conquered. It's his tour that he gave Babylonians, right? That was more Isaiah just like, you fool, but I just want you to know, just like all that you showed them, they gonna have.
Mm-hmm.
The actual action that results in the direct judgment from God is what King Manasseh is doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, verse 11. Because Manasseh, king of Judah, has committed these abominations, has done these more evil than the Amorites did, who were before him, and has made Judah also sin with his idols. Therefore, that says the Lord.
Yeah.
I'm finna wipe y'all out.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think it's crazy that not that just that verse, was another verse earlier that just says like he had them worse than the lands that God destroyed.
Exactly.
Right? Like
exactly.
I don't know if I've seen any king that's been a description.
Yep, verse 9. Yeah.
That like they were worse than the Canaanites in every land that they said, hey, this is an abomination. That God said this is the reason I'm bringing judgment on them is because they out here sacrificing kids and they doing this, and they doing that.
And
so they got to go.
The land.
Yeah, defiling it. They got to go. Man, Judah's gotten that bad. You know what I'm saying?
Worse.
Like worse than that. Like that's a shame.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, I do. Then verse 22, he abandoned the Lord. And like you said, God has put in so much work just for them to abandon him. And then...
You said 22?
22, uh-huh.
Yeah, well, I think we're at
sorry,
Amon.
I jumped. I'm sorry, I jumped.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's fine. So this is his son now.
Yes. No.
Amon, who's not much better. Right,
not at all.
Said. Like he's not. So he's abandoned the Lord as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting though to that point, right? Because he only reigns for 2 years.
Yes.
Because like the people are like, you know what? All right, we can't have this no more. They conspire against. They're like, bro, they
take him out.
You doing too much, man. We gotta take you out, and we're gonna make your son Josiah king. And you know it's bad because they killed the 24-year-old king to make the 8-year-old a king. Like you know it had to be bad. Like you know they had to be tripping. He had to be tripping.
Yeah.
It's just like, you know what, son, you gotta go.
Yeah.
I'd rather this toddler, like not toddler, but I'd rather this child, rule our nation than you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's ridiculous.
What do you want today, King? Apple juice or orange juice? With your afternoon snack before your evening nap. Like what? I'd rather do that than put up with your foolery.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So Josiah, 8 years old, like you said, which is crazy to think of, but he walks...
Right in the Lord's sight.
Right. Come on. Something like I think you called it a couple of days ago. Something about these young, childlike
our 7-year-old king from before, you know, and the same concept, right? The 7-year-old king before, and I can't recall which king that was now, but like, you know, he also has the heart to repair like the temple, right? And try to make things right. And Josiah's doing the same thing. For whatever reason, they really have this reverence for like, man, God's house needs to be right and fixed. So he does. He works to get the temple fixed, and in the midst of that, they actually find the Book of the Covenant, right?
Yeah.
The law, and it's such a great story. Like,
yeah.
What jumped out to you here in 22 as you know Josiah kind of leads the people after finding this book?
Yeah, I love it. Like he takes it seriously. And what interested me was like it seemed like the priest had an idea, but they still had to go to this prophetess, right? Like they went to this prophetess, Huldah, wife of Shalom, in verse 14, and they spoke to her. So it's kind of like, okay, yeah, the priest found these things. Like, we need somebody who we know is speaking directly to the Lord, though. Still. And so he has the priest go and to this prophetess just to make sure this is what the Lord is saying. Like, and she does. She gives him a word. Like, go tell this king that sent you here. It's like, my wrath is coming, right? Like, my wrath is coming. But in verse 19, like she said, because your heart was tender and you humbled yourself before the Lord, you know, before you wept, like, I will let you die first before this happens.
Yeah. Which, again, seems to be God's pattern, right? Like, it goes back to that. I don't know why that law it didn't stick out to me when we read it in Leviticus or Exodus, but when it was referred to in 2 Kings, it has stuck out to me, which was that idea that, like, yeah, let each man pay for their own sins, right? Like, their son or their father's not gonna pay for it. It's gonna be them. And I think, like, you see that play out because, again, if you're righteous and you live for me, God's like, all right, it won't be to you. Like, I won't make you pay for the sins of those that came before you or even those thereafter, right? Like, I will spare you. And so, yeah, I just love that it seems to just be his posture of, because you have a contrite heart and you care for me and you're going after, like, I will punish those thereafter, who at that point will be, like, guilty of it because they're gonna do their own stuff, right? As we just saw, like
Manasseh.
Like Hezekiah, all right, I won't do this in your lifetime. Manasseh, though, I'm coming after him because he crazy. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's this, to me, this clear justice, side of God in that regard that I love.
Yeah.
So, I mean, from that in 23, essentially the king kind of gathers the elders of Judah and Jerusalem, right? And they go to the Lord's temple, and I mean, they read all the words.
All of them. All
the words for everybody in their hearing, right? It said all the people from youngest to oldest, they read it to everybody. And he makes a covenant to the Lord, like, in their presence. So, I don't know, like, to me, it really just spoke, and we'll talk to a little bit about it here in a sec, but it spoke to how far they had fallen and come, right? That, like, reading these words almost felt like foreign to them.
Yeah.
Like, oh, wait, what? We were supposed to be doing this whole time? You know what I'm saying? Like, that, like, they just seem so, again, just so far from that. Which, of course, their actions reflected that too, but I think their encounter with righteousness or with the holy word showed that. And I think, yeah, like, their eyes were just open, and, it's a beautiful picture even today of just, like, what it looks like to have walked in the dark to see light, right? Like, type of thing that, like, you go, wow, this is what I've been missing this whole time. Like, very much like you're in a dark room and you walk outside and, like, your eyes take a little bit to adjust to, like, the light, but then you look around and you're like, oh wait, this whole time all this has been here, so yeah, it says that. But what else jumps out to you here in 23 as Josiah kind of leads some reform in this covenant with the people?
Yeah, it reminds me of, like you said, like, this book was hidden, like, it was lost. So they had no concept of, like, what the Lord even wanted them to do or not.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't just, like, doing what their parents did. It just reminds me now of, like, somebody's like, okay, I didn't grow up in church. Like, my family didn't serve the Lord. Like, my grandmother did it. My great-grandmother, like, we have never lived like that before. We might have heard of the Lord, but, like, we never lived like that before. And so coming to Christ at, like, age 18 or age 23 or age 30, right? Like, you're like, this is all new stuff, and this is how we're supposed to be living, right? That's what it reminded me of. But the other thing that jumped out to me, though, is in verse 4 and on, when they started talking about, like, all the things that he, like, got rid of, Baal and Asherah and all this stuff in the sky that they were, like, worshiping. And I mean, I feel like they named so many things here, high places here, and the thing to sacrifice your children, and there's these horses that the kings of Judah dedicated to the sun in verse 11, and these chariots, and there was some stuff that they had made on the roof of Ahab's upper chamber. That was altars that took. And I was like, geez, they've accumulated a lot of stuff. Like before, like it just talks about high places and astral poles that didn't get torn down and stuff. But like here, I'm just like, wow, this stuff was everywhere. And it reminded me of like, sometimes where, when we first stopped watching certain things or stopped having our kids watch certain things, like, and it was just like, okay, guys, like maybe we don't need all of the Nelia stuff around the house either, right? Like maybe we don't need all these cups, these plates, blankets, toys, and I just remember going through the house, like it was like the third day of cleaning out stuff, and I had like 5 or 6 trash bags later, and I'm like, geez, how much stuff have we accumulated over the time? Like I can't even tell you that we had this much stuff. I thought maybe I would have filled up 1 bag, but like we're 5 bags in now, like what? And that's what it reminded me here, is like they just kept finding more and more things in the land that pointed to idolatry, or that was idolatry.
Yeah. I mean, I love, as you said, it was very thorough. And I think this is what our life requires. Right? Is that same bit of thorough, like don't leave any remnants, any appearance of evil, right? Like just to get rid of it. I mean, he even went to deal with like Bethel and Israel stuff that wasn't even in Judah, right? Like he goes to deal with kind of stuff that was over there, because he's like, man, as far as I can reach, I'm gonna get rid of this stuff and the remnant of it, even in our neighbors and whatnot. I'm gonna be clear about who we kind of surround ourselves with. And so, yeah, I don't know. I thought that was like you said, that's a good point, specifically. Also, one of the things that was interesting to me was just that, like, I think I assumed that they had been observing Passover this whole time. I mean, it's not mentioned, but like they tell us in verse 21, I think this is, like, they had not observed Passover since the time of the judges. Like from 1 Samuel on, right? If we just think about what we just read, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, and none of that time, right? It says like, no such, this is verse 22, no such Passover had ever been observed from the time of the judges who judged Israel the entire time of the kings of Israel and Judah. But in the 18th year of King Josiah, the Lord's Passover was observed in Jerusalem. I'm like, man, that's a lot of time.
That's a lot of time. That's hundreds of years.
To have missed, like, this is how far they have strayed. They have even forgotten one of God's earliest commands to them when he established his people.
Yeah.
He gave them that before they left Egypt.
I was about to say, it's the first thing he told them on the way out from Egypt.
Like, before they even had the 10 Commandments, they had the Passover. Before they had Moses' law, they had Passover.
Yeah.
And even that, like, they weren't doing. And I'm just like, man, that is crazy how far they've come.
Yeah.
Anything else that you saw from what he did that you thought was particularly interesting before we get to the other kings of Judah?
Yeah. With this, I'm sad that how that he had to get killed, but yeah, I do. I mean, he even removed the spiritists and the cult prostitutes and all that. Like I said, he was thorough, and I love how you pointed out that's how our life should be. That like we should really be searching our lives to say, okay, Lord, anything that doesn't point towards you, anything that was like loving of anything else, like it's gotta go. Yeah. I love how detailed this is, how clear it is about it. Like in every other king, it was like, hey, they was right and they tore down some of this stuff and they did this. They were so clear with Josiah. Like this is all of what he actually did. Like, let's go do detail by detail. I think it just showed his real impact. And it would have been nice if this covenant and this reform would have led to the people of Judah really turning back to God. Oh my goodness. All this work.
Yeah, but unfortunately, his very next son, Jehoahaz, right?
I don't know how this happened.
Next king, it was evil, man, in the eyes of the Lord, and yeah, like, I don't know. We don't get a whole lot from him specifically, right? He only reigns for 3 months, so we don't have a real long account for him specifically. But his brother ends up becoming king. Yeah, like next, right? What do you think was interesting about Jehoiakim, who used to be kind of Eliakim?
Yeah. It's just this like enslavement and being taxed, and that's happening here, and it's, as you said to me, like, we can't even get a couple of generations down the road. Like, my parents, like, Lord, please show me what I need to do. And I know it's not. I know my kids have to choose for themselves whom they're gonna serve, right? But like, Lord, help me do all things possible so like it just doesn't happen, right? Like, I'm on fire for the Lord, and then my kids is like, wow, never coming back. At least come back.
Yeah.
After you wow. We prefer you not to wow. I already did that for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like it is, and then it results in enslavement, straight up.
Yeah. So this is kind of it's a start to, again, God's fulfillment of the promise he made through not just Isaiah but through the prophets of just like you're going to be conquered.
Yeah.
Right? Even what Josiah was told, right, before making all those reforms, this is what the prophet has come to tell him essentially. And the start of that really starts with Jehoiakim. And that relationship with Egypt first. Then in 24, we see Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon come along, right, specifically. Yeah. What do you think is interesting here as Nebuchadnezzar really starts to make his presence felt in Judah, and we start to see really the fall of Judah here? Anything you thought was interesting here in 24?
I thought it was crazy that like Pharaoh from Egypt thought he was running things, and all of a sudden he gets got by Babylon, like Nebuchadnezzar. So it's kind of like, oh, wait a minute, like he's about it. Like,
yeah, we'll just show you how bad Nebuchadnezzar was. Like, Babylon they were a superpower. They were for real. Like you said, even Egypt, who is a pretty great country and great, pretty strong.
Up to this point, everybody would go back to Egypt for help.
Yeah.
And
at this point now, it's just like there's a new big dog in town.
Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar.
And that he had to. And it says in my verse 1 that he became. That Jehoiakim became his vassal for 3 years, right? And then he turned to rebel. But then the Lord was just sending folk. It said the Lord sent Chaldean, Aramean, and Moabite, Ammonite raiders against him. So he's kind of like just sending folk. Like,
yeah, which probably Nebuchadnezzar probably rules all of those different nations, right? It's kind of the thing here. Which I want to call out also speaks to something. Back to your idea of just kind of God's patience with the people of Israel and Judah. Like, I think it's also says something that Israel and Judah were like some of the last nations in this area to be conquered by Babylon. Like, they had been able to hold out as long as they were, right? Like, or Assyria really for Israel, but like the fact that they were even able to hold out as long as they were, was because God was with them and kind of just kept the enemies at bay, right? And so at this point, it's just like enough's enough. But join the rest of them and everybody else who got conquered. Like, it's your turn, essentially as well. But I love. I mean, it just reminds them in verse 3, right? This is because of Manasseh's sins. Like, it was because of what he did.
Yeah.
Because he was wilding, right? Hezekiah's son.
So for Israel, it was Joab. Oh wait, what was his name? For Israel, it was
Ahab, I think it was.
No, who they always referred to, Jeroboam.
Oh, Jeroboam.
So yeah, before it was like it's because of Jeroboam, and they have he got to throw him in there now too. But then for Judah, Manasseh was that guy.
Manasseh. Yeah. So Jehoiakim dies. Jehoiachin kind of becomes king at 18 of Jerusalem, and they're still obviously at war with Babylon. They're really trying to do this, and then, man, Babylon comes in and just finally takes over, right? And exiles them and deports them, is the word that my version uses, and takes the king with them, right? So he takes Jehoiakim with him, which was kind of a thing that Nebuchadnezzar was known for. It was just like conquering kings and taking them.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I thought it was interesting that like he kind of places his uncle as king in his place, Zedekiah, and yeah, I don't know, still obviously a descendant of David, just not necessarily like straight line now, because it's kind of like, yeah, his father's brother, right, type of thing. But anything you think was interesting about Zedekiah here before we get to our last chapter for the day?
Yeah, I mean, it ends with him rebelling against King of Babylon. I was like, you know, this isn't going to end up well for you. This isn't going well. Who are you gonna call on? You're not calling on the Lord. All the other nations is conquered. So, but it did stick out to me though that they did deport like all of the commanders, all the best soldiers, like 10,000 captives, including all the craftsmen, the metalsmiths, sorry, and that they only just left the poor people there to be governed. So that was in verse 14 there. So when we start seeing the whole, you know, the story of Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, like, and they were wise men, right? And they worked in the palace. It was like, yes, because that makes sense, because he took the best of the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. We're not quite to that yet, but yes, this is where, you know, quick shout out for if you ever read a chronological Bible.
Yes, that'll help.
Or just do a chronological reading plan. This is where like a lot of the Bible will start to blend. It is really the last, I'll say, 4 books, 1 Samuel all the way through 2 Kings and through Chronicles, because you'll get a lot of, you know, here's a story about David, here's a psalm he wrote, you know, about that story, that kind of thing, right? Or in this case, here they're exiled, right? And as you said, now let's talk a little about Daniel as he's in Babylon and what happens there, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as well. So yeah, we won't get to Daniel for a few books, right? We still have some time before we get there, but we will be referring back to kind of some of these stories at that point because of what you're mentioning.
Yeah.
Well, 25, it's the end.
It's the end.
This is kind of how it ends. Nebuchadnezzar's finally had enough. He brings his entire army this time and conquers the people, and kind of conquers Jerusalem specifically, which is their capital city, right? This is where the Lord's temple is, and man, he lays siege to it. He destroys it all. What jumped out to you here in 25?
Well, yeah, he said the entire army, and then Zedekiah's entire army, which was probably like
12 people,
15 people now, give or take. I'm like, what army? They took all the best soldiers and the commanders already, okay?
Yeah.
And so they abandoned him, and it didn't end well with him. They slaughtered his sons before him, which is just terrible, and they blinded him and took him to Babylon. But yeah, and then what hurt my heart the most is when we start seeing verse 9, they might burn the temple. And you had laid it out for us before how the temple and the palace and all that was treasuries was all next to each other. It was like one big, like massive construction.
Complex, yeah.
Yeah, and so you just see that they have like just burned all of that down and all the great houses and all that. I was just like, yikes, like the burning. Like I didn't, when they said that they repaired the temple, I don't even think I realized that like stuff had been burned down. I thought about being smashed down. And the walls being smashed down. And but I'm thinking about now all that cedar and all that stuff that Solomon had put in there and those like, precious woods and stuff, and just like now visually seeing that burning.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Like I said, I think it does speak to just how fed up God was with the people that he would even let his house be destroyed in the process, right? And of course, he doesn't dwell there. He said he'd meet him there. He doesn't dwell there. But yeah, man, this was, again, it was so symbolic. Like, it was God just saying, like, I just want you to know this place that I promised you, it's no more. You know? And yeah, I'm done, man. I've had enough. So yeah, I don't know. It's, in some ways, again, I can understand how a Babylon or others would like see this and go, yeah, you're God. You know, same thing Moses said was going to happen if he killed them out in the wilderness. The Egyptians are going to say their God couldn't even take them to that land, right? But I love that, as we'll see, although the temple is destroyed, God does not stop showing himself. Right? Like, he still keeps showing up for the people. Which I just think is so good. And it even shows up in the way that, like, he keeps someone from David's line alive. Right? Like, we talked about Jehoiakim, who back in 24, right? Like, Nebuchadnezzar takes him and then places Zedekiah as king. Right. But then, like, at the end of 25, you know, it's on the 27th day of the 12th month of the 37th year of exile. So they've been exiled for 37 years. Like, King of Babylon, he pardons King Jehoiakim. Like, he releases him from prison. Like, he's still alive. Which, to me, I think is so big that it ends this way. Because I think if the Jews just read this, people of Israel read this, the Hebrews, at first it was like no hope. What happened to the promise? Right. What happened to God's promise that there would always be someone on the throne? What happened to the promise that this, that, and the other? And I feel like this is just back to that Easter egg thing, right? I just talk about like the little end credits. It's the end credits, the extra scene at the end credits, right? Oh, by the way, Jehoiakim's still alive, though. Yep. He's still alive. There's still a seed of David. Yeah. So now. That's so good. I don't know. I just thought that's such a dope way, man, for that to end. But anything else here in 25? I know I kind of jumped a little bit to the end, but anything else in 25 that jumped out to you? No, I mean, that's all. Like, for me, it's just they destroyed everything. They took everything away and enslaved everyone and left somebody to govern the people who were going to look out for the vineyards, and God did what he said he was going to do. Yeah. It's heartbreaking to see, but they had it coming for so long. Yeah. But he kept his promise alive. He kept his promise. And I feel like that's what the whole Chronicles is about. Like, Chronicles is like continuing to show these stories in the light of hope. Right? Like, there's hope, there's hope, there's hope, there's hope, there's hope. Yeah, you guys might be frustrated. You might be frustrated that, like, you're not seeing, you know, the promises fulfilled. And now we have prophecies that are coming about Jesus and stuff. And they're like, well, what about this? What about that? It's like, no, like you said, the Lord continues to have this glimmer of light and hope. Yeah, that's good. It's good. So we can end with hope ourselves, because there's hope still at the end of this. Again, very relevant. It can look like the world is falling apart around us, but there's hope. It might be. Yeah, it might actually be, but there's still hope. Because there's still someone that sits on the throne. There's still a seat of David. Jesus is still alive, right? And so, man, what a great way to end this week, to end 2 Kings. Pray. Again, it's been helpful. We are now 12 books down that we have read and completed. And we'll move on to 1 Chronicles next week. So excited. First couple of days. I won't be with you next week.
Yeah.
So, you'll hear from my wife and Shay, who will be with you next week to pick up at the beginning of 1 Chronicles. And so, until I see you again, take care. But, till then, God bless.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.